What if I told you that a World Cup soccer match once started a war? Not a metaphorical war of words, but a real, shooting war with tanks, warplanes, and thousands of dead. This is the story of the 100-hour war between El Salvador and Honduras, a conflict the world remembers by a deceptively simple name, the Football War. But what was really happening on the field that could push two nations over the edge? Was it really just about a game? And what were the terrifying, hidden reasons that governments would willingly send the young men to die over a soccer match? Stay with us until the end, because the answers are more shocking and relevant today than you can imagine. If you appreciate our deep dives into forgotten history, please help the channel by liking this video and subscribing for more content. All the sources for this extensive research are listed in the description below. Let's set the scene not on the soccer pitch, but in the dusty, overcrowded countryside of El Salvador in the 1960s. According to historical census data and reports from the time, El Salvador was a pressure cooker, a tiny country with a massive population dominated by a handful of wealthy families who owned most of the land. Meanwhile, next door, Honduras was larger, less populated, but desperately poor. For decades, a slow, steady stream of over 300,000 Salvadorans had crossed the border, seeking land and a better life. Now, this is the first crucial piece most people miss. According to political analyses of the era, the Honduran government, under pressure from its own citizens, passed a sweeping land reform law in 1969. This law, in principle, was about redistributing land to Honduran peasants, but in practice, it specifically targeted the Salvadoran immigrants, stripping them of the land they had worked for years. This created a massive refugee crisis, with tens of thousands of Salvadorans being violently expelled and forced back into their already overcrowded homeland. The tension was already at a boiling point, a simmering conflict over land, identity, and survival. This is where the beautiful game enters the story, not as a cause, but as a perfect weapon. The 1970 World Cup qualifiers pitted the two nations against each other, and the governments and media saw a golden opportunity. According to archived newspaper clippings and radio transcripts, the press in both nations went into a frenzy. Honduran papers painted Salvadorans as thieves stealing their jobs, while Salvadoran media portrayed Hondurans as brutal oppressors. The three qualifying matches became a proxy war. When Honduras won the first game at home, reports emerged of Salvadoran players being kept awake all night by a screaming mob outside their hotel. When El Salvador won the second leg, Honduran fans were harassed and their flag was allegedly insulted. The animosity was entirely manufactured, a spectacle designed to direct public rage away from the failures of each government and towards a convenient external enemy. Then came the third, tie-breaking match in Mexico City, which El Salvador won in a nail-biting 3-2 overtime. And here is the moment that truly shows how manipulated the public sentiment was. According to multiple historical accounts from Salvadoran journalists of the time, an 18-year-old woman named Emilia Bolaños was so overcome with passion after the final whistle that she took her father's pistol and shot herself in the heart. She was instantly declared a national martyr, given a state funeral televised across the nation, with the Salvadoran soccer team themselves marching as her pallbearers. Think about that. A young woman's suicide over a soccer game was elevated to an act of patriotic sacrifice. As I analyze these facts, I can easily conclude that this was not a spontaneous public reaction. This was the culmination of a calculated media campaign that had successfully blurred the line between sport and national survival. The stage was now set for a real war, and the public, on both sides, had been primed to see it as a justified continuation of the game. So, On July 14, 1969, El Salvador launched a military invasion. The Salvadoran Air Force used vintage Mustang and Corsair planes from World War II to bomb Honduran targets, while ground forces pushed across the border. But the war was a brutal, chaotic farce. According to military after-action reports and soldier testimonies, the invasion quickly stalled. Salvadoran troops ran out of fuel and ammunition, and the Honduran Air Force retaliated by bombing Salvadoran oil facilities. The conflict only lasted about 100 hours before the Organization of American States forced a ceasefire, but the human cost was devastating, with an estimated 3,000 to 6,000 people dead, most of them innocent civilians caught in the violence. The true legacy of the football war, however, is found in its aftermath, an aspect most documentaries completely ignore. The peace treaty wasn't formally signed until 1980, 11 years later. The war solved nothing for El Salvador. In fact, it made everything worse. The refugee crisis was intensified, and the social pressures that the war was designed to release instead exploded just a decade later into the horrific Salvadoran Civil War, a conflict that would claim 75,000 lives. Honduras, too, was left more militarized and impoverished. Looking at the chain of events, from the land disputes to the media propaganda to the devastating, long-term consequences, my personal analysis is this: the football war is the ultimate case study in what scholars call a diversionary war. A struggling government, facing internal collapse, can use nationalism, media, and a symbolic external threat, be it a soccer team, an immigrant group, or a rival nation, to unite its population and divert attention from its own failures. It's a terrifying playbook that has been used throughout history. So, was it really about football? Absolutely not. It was about land, power, and the cynical manipulation of human passion, a deadly game where the final score was measured in thousands of lives lost and a region set on a path to further chaos.